I didn't scream when I saw the $10,000 debt. I simply walked into her kitchen and placed the statement on the table. My mother-in-law didn't even look up from her tea as she said, "I was going to give that back to you as a surprise gift for your birthday." I leaned in, my voice a flat, steady line. "With my own money, Margaret? Give me the card, now." $10,214. That was the price of my trust. While I was working 60-hour weeks to afford our first home, my mother-in-law was using a credit card I didn't even know existed. She didn't just steal my money, she forged my signature on an application she intercepted from my own mailbox. She thought she was entitled to my sweat and my future because I was family. But she forgot one thing. I keep receipts for everything. If you found out your mother-in-law spent your house deposit on a luxury vacation, would you stay silent to keep the peace, or would you burn the bridge to save yourself? If you were in my shoes, what would you do? Type 1 if you would forgive her to keep your marriage intact, or type 2 if you would file a police report for forgery. Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, click that button now, because what happens next will change everything. I remember the exact temperature of the room when my life changed. It was 68 degrees, the perfect setting for focus. I was sitting at my glass-topped desk, the soft hum of my laptop fan the only sound in our small apartment. On the screen was the final application for our first home loan. I had spent 3 years, 4 months, and 12 days preparing for this moment. I am a woman who finds peace in spreadsheets and comfort in a balanced ledger. Every cent of our savings was accounted for. Every debt had been meticulously erased. Or so I thought. I moved the cursor to the Refresh Credit Report button. I expected to see a clean slate, a zero balance that would secure our future. I clicked. The little blue circle spun for 3 seconds. 3 seconds where my future was still intact. Then the numbers loaded. $10,214.32. I didn't gasp. I didn't scream. I simply stared at the red text on the white background. It looked like a surgical incision. My hands remained steady as I reached for my glass of water, taking a slow, deliberate sip. The cold liquid hit the back of my throat, grounding me. I didn't feel anger yet. I felt a clinical, detached curiosity. I logged into the primary credit card portal. This was the emergency card my husband and I had agreed to pay off and keep in a drawer for the house transition. The primary balance showed as cleared. But then I saw it. A secondary tab. A sub-account I had never authorized. User 2. My eyes scanned the transaction history. It was a dizzying list of luxury and entitlement. $3,000 for a high-end surround sound system. $2,400 for premium Disney World Park passes, including the VIP meal plans, a series of charges for designer clothing, and a cherrywood executive desk. The dates were the most damning part. The account had been activated 6 months ago. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly under my weight. I closed my eyes and let my mind travel back to that week in late July. I had been away on a business trip in Chicago. My husband was working double shifts at the firm. I remembered a fleeting comment from my mother-in-law, Margaret, about how she had checked the mail for us while we were busy. I remembered the way she smiled, that tight, thin-lipped expression she uses when she's keeping a secret. I opened the digital copy of the original credit card application. I scrolled past my own handwriting until I reached the bottom. There, in the section for additional cardholders, was a check mark. It was a small, ink-heavy stroke that looked nothing like my own precise markings. Below it was a signature. It was my name, spelled correctly, but the S was too looped, the A too slanted. It was a forgery, a clumsy, arrogant attempt to steal my credit and my future. I didn't call my husband. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I simply reached for my printer and hit print. The sound of the machine whirring to life filled the silent room, the mechanical rhythm acting as a countdown. Sheet after sheet of evidence slid into the tray. $10,000. That was the price Margaret had placed on our relationship. She thought she could hide behind the shield of family while she bled us dry for her own vanity. She thought I was the kind of woman who would prioritize peace over justice. She was wrong. I took a black pen and circled the forged signature on the first page. My hand didn't shake. I felt a strange, cold clarity. The game had started, and Margaret had no idea that I already held all the cards. The printer tray was warm when I gathered the sheets of paper. 32 pages. 32 pages of betrayal, neatly organized in a black leather folder. I sat back down at my desk and opened a new Excel spreadsheet. My fingers moved across the keys with a rhythmic precision that usually brought me peace. Today, it felt like I was arming a weapon. I titled the file, Margaret's Debt, Final Audit. In the first column, I entered the dates. In the second, the amounts. In the third, the locations. Best Buy, Disney World, West Elm, Apple. Each entry felt like a small, cold stone being placed in my palm. The total at the bottom remained unchanged. $10,214.32. It was the exact amount we needed for our closing costs on the house. At exactly 9 a.m., I picked up my phone. My voice was level, my breathing shallow but steady. I dialed the number on the back of my primary card. Thank you for calling Elite Rewards Support. My name is Marcus. How can I assist you today? The voice on the other end chirped. Hello, Marcus, I said, my voice cutting through his rehearsed cheerfulness. My name is Sarah Miller. I am looking at a sub-account on my recent statement labeled User 2. I have no record of authorizing a secondary card holder. I need to know when this card was requested and where it was sent. I heard the rapid tapping of keys. The silence on the line stretched for several seconds. I spent that time looking at the dust motes dancing in a beam of sunlight on my desk. Everything in the room looked normal, yet my entire reality had shifted. I see here, Mrs. Miller, Marcus finally said, his tone shifting to something more professional. The secondary card was requested on July 14th. It was an add-on to your original application. It was processed at the same time as your primary card. That's impossible, I replied, my voice as sharp as a scalpel. I filled out that application myself. I never checked that box. I have the digital copy of my submission here, and it shows the additional cardholder section was left blank. I understand your concern, he said. However, our records show a physical amendment was filed. It was intercepted before final processing. A paper form was mailed back to our processing center with your signature, requesting a card for a Margaret Miller. A paper form, I repeated. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, but my face remained an expressionless mask. And the delivery address for that specific card? It was sent to your home address on record on July 21st. July 21st. I closed my eyes. I was in Chicago that week for the quarterly audit. My husband, David, was working 12-hour shifts at the hospital. We had given Margaret our spare key so she could help out by collecting the mail and watering the plants. She hadn't been helping. She had been hunting. Marcus, I said, my voice dropping an octave, I need a high-resolution PDF of that physical amendment, the one with the signature. I also need the full transaction history for User 2, including the IP addresses for any online purchases and the shipping addresses for the physical goods. I can certainly initiate that request for you, but it may take 48 hours to— I'm an associate auditor for a Tier 1 firm, Marcus, I interrupted him, my tone clinical and unyielding. I'm currently looking at a case of identity theft and mail fraud. If I don't have those documents in my inbox within the hour, my next call will be to your legal compliance department, case number 049287. Do you have that? Yes, ma'am. I'll escalate this immediately. I hung up. I didn't feel the rush of adrenaline people talk about. I felt a deep, hollow silence. I looked at the black folder on my desk. Inside was the evidence of a woman who thought she was smarter than the system. She thought that because we were family, I wouldn't look closely at the numbers. She thought I was a girl who played with dollhouses, not a woman who built financial fortresses. 40 minutes later, the email arrived. I opened the attachment. There it was, the paper amendment. The ink was a slightly different shade of blue than the one I use. My name was written at the top in a script that tried too hard to look like mine. But the signature at the bottom, that was the giveaway. Margaret had always had a flamboyant way of crossing her T's. She had tried to suppress it, but the muscle memory had betrayed her. The cross stroke was long, aggressive, and tilted upward. I compared it to a birthday card she had sent me last year. It was a perfect match. I spent the next hour tracing the shipping addresses. The cherrywood desk, shipped to her house. The surround sound system, shipped to her house. The Disney tickets, sent to her personal email address, an email address I had helped her set up 2 years ago. She hadn't even tried to be subtle. She was so convinced of her own untouchability, so certain that her role as the mother gave her a divine right to my earnings, that she had left a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to her front door. I stood up and smoothed my skirt. I didn't call David. He was too soft, too conditioned to excuse his mother's eccentricities. This wasn't an eccentricity. This was a $10,000 heist. I picked up the folder and my car keys. The drive to Margaret's house took 20 minutes. I didn't turn on the radio. I preferred the sound of my own thoughts, cold and methodical. As I pulled into her driveway, I saw her through the kitchen window. She was sitting at her table, peacefully sipping tea from a porcelain cup, a cup that had likely been bought with my money. I turned off the engine. My heart rate was a steady 60 beats per minute. I wasn't going in there to scream. I was going in there to collect a debt. I sat in the driveway for exactly 4 minutes. My engine was off, but the silence inside the car felt heavy, almost pressurized. In my lap lay the black leather folder, the weight of it anchoring me to the seat. I opened it one more time, not because I needed to see the evidence, but because I wanted to memorize the exact shape of the betrayal. I pulled out the high-resolution scan the bank had emailed me. Under the harsh morning sun, the flaws in the forgery were even more apparent. I traced the signature with my index finger. My own signature is a product of years of signing corporate audits. It is fast, sharp, and consistent. Margaret's attempt to mimic it was hesitant. You could see the shake in the ink where she had paused, unsure of the next curve. The way she had looped the M in Miller was too round, too soft. It was the handwriting of a woman who thought she was playing a game of dress-up with someone else's life. I reached into the side pocket of the folder and pulled out a magnifying glass I kept for reviewing fine print contracts. I held it over the date line, July 14th. A cold, sharp memory surfaced. I was in a boardroom in Chicago, staring at a PowerPoint presentation on tax compliance when my phone had buzzed on the mahogany table. It was a text from Margaret. "Just check the mail for you, honey. A few bills and some junk. I'll keep them safe on the kitchen counter for when you get back. Focus on your big meeting. XOXO." I remember smiling at that text. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have a mother-in-law who looked out for us. I had even felt a pang of guilt for finding her overbearing in the past. But while I was presenting data to a board of directors, Margaret was standing in my kitchen, opening my private correspondence with a letter opener. She had seen the credit card application, the one I had carefully filled out to consolidate our closing costs, and she had seen an opportunity. She hadn't just kept it safe, she had amended it. She had checked the box for a secondary card holder and forged my consent. She had effectively walked into a bank, wearing my identity like a stolen coat, and walked out with a $10,000 line of credit. My eyes drifted down to the itemized list of charges. This wasn't just about luxury for herself, it was about buying loyalty. Transaction number 4821, $1,200 for a semester of community college tuition for David's younger brother, Leo. Transaction number 5019, $3,000 for a surround sound home theater system delivered to her own address but clearly meant as a gift for her youngest son's basement apartment. She was playing the role of the generous matriarch, the provider, the golden mother, and she was doing it using my credit score as her personal bank account. I looked at the house in front of me. It was a modest suburban home with a perfectly manicured lawn and white shutters. To the neighbors, Margaret was a saintly widow who lived for her children. To me, she was now a data point in a criminal investigation. I thought about the Disney World charge. $2,400. I knew exactly when that happened. 2 weeks after I returned from Chicago, Margaret had surprised the younger siblings with a trip to Florida. She told David and me that she had saved up her Social Security checks to give them a memory they'd never forget. David had been so moved. He had hugged her and told her she was the most selfless woman he knew. I felt a bitter taste in my mouth. She hadn't saved a dime. She had sat in the VIP lounge at Epcot, sipping expensive cocktails and watching fireworks, while I was working late-night shifts to save for a house she was actively sabotaging. The clinical part of my brain, the auditor, started calculating the long-term damage. The interest rates on that card were 24%. With the late fees she hadn't bothered to pay, the balance was growing daily. This wasn't just a theft. It was a financial anchor tied around my neck, designed to keep me and David exactly where she wanted us, under her thumb, in a tiny apartment, forever dependent on her guidance. I put the magnifying glass back into the folder. I didn't feel the heat of anger. I felt the chill of absolute resolve. In my world, numbers don't lie. They don't have intentions, and they don't have family values. They are simply facts. And the fact was, Margaret Miller had committed 3 counts of felony fraud. I checked my watch, 9:45 a.m. I stepped out of the car. The air was crisp, the neighborhood quiet. I could hear a distant lawnmower and the chirping of birds. I walked up the driveway, the gravel crunching under my heels with a sound like breaking bone. Each step was a deliberate movement toward a confrontation she was entirely unprepared for. She thought I was coming over for tea. She thought I was the sweet girl who worked with numbers. She didn't realize that when an auditor finds a discrepancy, they don't stop until the balance is restored. I reached the front door and didn't knock. I used my spare key. I turned the lock softly, the mechanism clicking into place. I walked into the house, my folder tucked under my arm like a shield. The kitchen smelled of lavender-scented floor cleaner and Earl Grey tea. It was a domestic, peaceful scent, the kind that usually signals safety. Margaret was sitting at the oak breakfast nook, her back to me, scrolling through her tablet with one hand and lifting a floral porcelain cup with the other. The morning light caught the steam rising from her tea, creating a soft, hazy halo around her. I didn't say a word. I walked across the linoleum, my heels making a rhythmic, sharp clicking sound that seemed to slice through the quiet. I reached the granite countertop and placed the black leather folder down. I didn't slam it. I simply let it fall the last inch, the weight of the 32 pages creating a dull, heavy thud that vibrated through the stone. Margaret jumped, her tea splashing slightly onto her saucer. She turned around, a hand flying to her chest, her face a mask of startled maternal concern. "Oh, Sarah, you nearly gave me a heart attack," she said, her voice fluttering with a practiced, light-hearted lilt. "I didn't hear the door. What are you doing here so early, honey? Is David with you?" "David is at the hospital," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of the usual warmth I forced into our interactions. I pulled out a chair and sat opposite her. I didn't lean back. I sat on the edge, my spine a straight line of steel. "I'm here about the house loan, specifically the credit check." Margaret's eyes flickered. It was a microscopic movement, a quick dart toward the folder and then back to my face, but I caught it. In my line of work, we call that a hot spot. It's the moment a subject's body betrays their internal panic. "The loan?" she repeated, her smile widening just a fraction too much. "How exciting! Everything is on track, I hope. You two have worked so hard." "Everything was on track," I replied. I opened the folder and slid the first document across the table. It was the itemized statement from the bank, the one with the $10,000 balance highlighted in a neon yellow ink that looked like a radioactive wound on the white paper. Until I found this. Margaret didn't pick up the paper. She squinted at it from a distance, her hand still hovering near her throat. "What is that, dear? It looks like a bill." "It's more than a bill, Margaret. It's a transaction history for a sub-account on my credit line, an account assigned to a user 2, an account I never authorized." I watched her face carefully. The St. Margaret mask was beginning to crack. The color was draining from her cheeks, leaving behind a sallow, grayish tint. She took a slow sip of her tea, trying to buy herself time. I could hear the ceramic clink against her teeth, a tiny, brittle sound that revealed the tremor in her hand. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why are you showing this to me?" "Because the bank sent me the physical amendment form that was used to open this account," I said, my voice dropping into a low, clinical tone. I slid the second document across, the high-resolution scan of the forged application. "It was mailed to our house while I was in Chicago. The person who filled it out checked the box for a secondary card. They wrote your name in the authorized user field, and then they signed my name at the bottom." I leaned forward, closing the distance between us. The smell of her tea was cloying now, suffocating. "The signature is a forgery, Margaret, a felony. And the spending? It's fascinating. $3,000 for a surround sound system that is currently sitting in your living room, $1,200 for Leo's tuition, and $2,400 for a VIP Disney package." Margaret set her cup down. It hit the saucer with a sharp clack. The confused grandmother act was gone. In its place was something sharper, something more desperate. She didn't deny it. She didn't look shocked. She just looked at me with a cold, simmering resentment. "You always were so obsessed with your little numbers, Sarah," she said, her voice losing its sweetness and turning into something thin and acidic. "You and David have so much. You're buying a house. You have professional careers. Your brothers and sisters have nothing. I did what a mother is supposed to do. I provided for my family." "You didn't provide for them, Margaret," I said, my eyes locked onto hers. "You stole from me. You used my identity to fund a lifestyle you couldn't afford, and in doing so, you've put our house loan in jeopardy. You didn't just spend money, you spent our future." The silence that followed was heavy. I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall and the distant hum of her refrigerator. For a moment, she looked like she might break, like she might apologize. But then, her jaw set into a hard line. She reached out and touched the porcelain cup again, her knuckles white. "I was going to pay it back," she said, the lie sliding out of her mouth with practiced ease. "I was just waiting for the right moment to tell you. It was meant to be a surprise." I didn't blink. I didn't move. I simply stared at her until she looked away. "A surprise," I repeated. "Using my own credit to buy gifts for your children, while letting the late fees pile up until my credit score dropped 60 points. That's not a surprise, Margaret. That's a betrayal." I reached into the folder and pulled out a pair of heavy-duty kitchen shears I had brought from my own home. I placed them on the table next to the folder. "Give me the card," I said. "Now." Margaret didn't flinch. Instead, she let out a sharp, dry laugh that sounded like dead leaves skittering across pavement. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea, her eyes never leaving mine. "Oh, Sarah, you've always been so mathematical. It's a bit chilling, really." I didn't blink. I simply watched the pulse thrumming in her neck. "Mathematical is how you pay a mortgage, Margaret. Forgery is how you go to prison." She set her cup down with a clink. The mask of the doting mother-in-law slid back into place, slick with false warmth. "I was actually going to give that card back to you next month. It was supposed to be a surprise gift for your birthday. I wanted to handle the shopping so you wouldn't have to stress about the house and the wedding at the same time. I was protecting you." I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper that felt heavier than a shout. "A surprise gift? You spent $10,214 of my credit to buy me a gift? That isn't protection. That's embezzlement." "I'm your mother-in-law," she snapped, the sugar in her voice turning to acid. "Everything I do is for this family. I saw how tired you were, and I thought, Margaret, take the burden off her. I was going to pay the balance off once my bridge club investment matured. You've completely ruined the surprise now with your suspicious nature." I checked my watch. 9:52 a.m. "My birthday is in November. It's currently August. You've missed 3 minimum payments, and the interest is compounding at 24%. If I hadn't checked my report today, this surprise would have triggered a rejection on our mortgage application by Monday morning." Margaret's face hardened, the skin tightening over her cheekbones. The gaslighting was failing, and we both knew it. After everything I've done for you and David, I welcomed you into this family and you come into my home and treat me like a common thief over a few receipts? You're cold, Sarah. No wonder David's siblings find you so difficult to be around. I'm not cold, Margaret, I said, sliding the heavy kitchen shears toward the center of the table. I'm an auditor, and right now, your account is in the red. The emotional theater won't change the numbers on this page. I'm going to count to 3. If that card isn't on this granite countertop, I'm calling the fraud department of the bank while sitting in this chair. 1. The kitchen went silent. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock and Margaret's ragged, uneven breathing. 2. 3. The word hung in the sterile air of the kitchen like a cold mist. My thumb hovered over the call button on my screen. Margaret's eyes darted from the phone to my face, searching for a hint of a bluff. She found none. My expression was a flat, gray line of absolute resolve. With a sharp, guttural sound of frustration, she shoved her chair back. The legs screeched against the linoleum, a high-pitched, jarring noise that set my teeth on edge. She marched into the hallway, her footsteps heavy and uneven. A moment later, she returned, clutching a designer leather handbag, a brand I knew for a fact she couldn't afford on her pension. She reached inside and pulled out a shimmering gold card. She didn't hand it to me, she threw it. It skittered across the granite countertop and came to a rest against my folder. There, she spat, her voice trembling with a mixture of fury and shame. Take your precious piece of plastic. I hope you're happy now that you've humiliated your own family. I didn't answer. I picked up the card. It felt light, insignificant, yet it represented $10,000 of stolen labor. If you were in my shoes, what would you do? Type 1 if you would keep the peace to avoid a family war, or Type 2 if you would demand every cent back with interest. Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, click that button now, because what happens next will change everything. I picked up the heavy kitchen shears. The metal was cold against my palm. I aligned the blades with the magnetic strip of the card. Margaret watched, her breath coming in shallow hitches. I applied pressure. The sound of the plastic snapping was surprisingly loud in the silence, a sharp, final crack that echoed off the tile walls. I cut it again, and again, until the gold card was nothing more than a pile of jagged, useless shards on the counter. That's the easy part, Margaret, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I looked up at her, my eyes narrowing. Now we talk about the $10,214. I want a repayment plan on my desk by tomorrow morning, or I walk into the police station with this folder, and I don't care who it hurts. The pieces of the gold card lay scattered on the granite countertop like expensive confetti from a party that had ended in a disaster. I didn't move my hand from the kitchen shears. I simply let the silence stretch until the ticking of the wall clock felt like a hammer against my skull. Margaret stared at the shards, her mouth hanging open, her breath coming in short, ragged hitches. The golden mother persona was gone, replaced by the raw, ugly desperation of someone who had finally run out of lies. You're heartless, she whispered, her voice cracking. I am your family. I am the woman who raised the man you sleep next to every night. And you treat me like a common criminal over some debt? It's not some debt, Margaret, I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. It is exactly $10,214.32. That is the cost of our house deposit. That is the cost of our future. You didn't just steal money, you tried to steal our stability. I opened the black folder one last time and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. I had already prepared a promissory note, typed in a crisp 12-point font. I placed it on the table, along with a black ballpoint pen. I have already spoken to the bank's fraud department, I lied. A small tactical deception was necessary to maintain the pressure. They are currently reviewing the security footage from the Best Buy and the Apple Store. They have the IP addresses from the online orders. They are waiting for my signal to proceed with a formal criminal complaint for identity theft and mail fraud." Margaret's face drained of what little color was left. Her hand reached out, trembling, and touched the edge of the paper. "Sarah, please, you can't. It would ruin me, my reputation, the family." "Then fix the balance," I interrupted. "I'm not interested in your reputation. I'm an auditor, and right now the ledger is lopsided. I want a full repayment schedule. I want the first installment of $5,000 by tomorrow at 5 p.m. If that money isn't in our joint savings account, I walk into the precinct. I don't care about the family war you think this will start. I only care about the numbers." I stood up, smoothing the front of my charcoal blazer. I didn't look at her with anger. I looked at her with the same detached professional interest I would give a failing company. 24 hours, Margaret," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the cold kitchen. "The clock is already ticking. Don't call David. Don't try to gaslight him, because if he calls me asking why I'm stressing you out, I'll just hit send on the digital evidence folder I've already shared with his personal email. The choice is yours." I picked up my shears, tucked the black folder under my arm, and walked toward the door. I didn't look back. The sound of her sobbing started just as the door clicked shut behind me, but I didn't stop. I had a house to buy, and I wasn't going to let a forged signature stand in my way. The deadline was 5 p.m. on Friday. I sat at my dining table, a glass of ice water in front of me, watching the digital clock on the microwave, 5:01, 5:02. At exactly 5:05, there was a heavy metallic thud against my front door, followed by a sharp, aggressive knock. I opened the door to find Margaret standing there, her face flushed a deep, angry crimson. She wasn't carrying a checkbook or an envelope of cash. She was clutching 3 heavy, reinforced canvas bags. Without a word, she dropped them at my feet. The sound of thousands of coins crashing against the hardwood floor sounded like a building collapsing. "There," she hissed, her voice trembling with spite. $300. It's every cent I could scrape together from the kids' piggy banks and my spare change jars. Since you're so obsessed with your numbers, you can count them yourself." I looked down at the bags. A few loose pennies had escaped, rolling across the floor like tiny copper insults. I didn't look up at her. I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me frustrated. "This is $300, Margaret," I said, my voice as flat as a dial tone. "You still owe $9,914.32. Be grateful I gave you anything at all," she shrieked, her composure finally shattering. "You're a cold-blooded vulture, Sarah. Only a monster would make an old woman carry 30,000 pennies across town. Enjoy your victory." She turned and marched back to her car, the tires screeching as she peeled out of my driveway. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, the smell of old copper and resentment filling the air. I didn't call her back. I didn't cry. Instead, I went to the kitchen and grabbed a box of paper coin wrappers I had bought at the bank an hour earlier. I knew she would try something like this. Pettiness is the last refuge of the guilty. For the next 6 hours, I sat on the floor in total silence. One by one, I slid the pennies into the paper tubes, 50 coins per roll, 6 rolls per hour. The rhythmic clink, clink, clink of the metal was the only sound in the apartment. My fingers turned a dull, metallic gray. The copper stained my skin, but I didn't wash it off. Each roll I finished represented a small piece of the bridge I was burning. She thought this would break me. She thought the manual labor would make me realize that the stress wasn't worth the money. But as I crimped the edges of the last paper tube, I felt a strange, chilling sense of peace. Margaret had given me exactly what I needed, physical proof of her character. She had chosen to pay a $10,000 debt of fraud with $300 of spite. She had officially traded her relationship with her daughter-in-law for a bag of loose change. I placed the neatly stacked rolls into a box. Tomorrow, I would take them to the bank, and on Monday, I would take the remaining $9,000 deficit to my lawyer. 1,095 days. That's how long it had been since I sat on my hardwood floor, my fingers stained gray from wrapping 30,000 pennies. We didn't get the sprawling suburban house Margaret had envisioned for us. the one with the guest suite she assumed she would eventually occupy. Instead, we lived in a modest, sun-drenched two-bedroom apartment. It was quiet, it was efficient, and every square inch of it was paid for by honest labor. Margaret arrived at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, unannounced. She still wore her St. Margaret mask, though the edges were fraying. Her coat was a season out of style, and the designer handbag she had bought with my stolen credit was now scuffed and dull. She walked into my living room, her eyes darting around the minimalist decor with a look of thinly veiled disappointment. "It's cozy," she said, the word landing like a quiet insult. She ran a single manicured finger along the top of my bookshelf, checking for dust. "But David always told me you were such a high flyer, Sarah. I expected something grander. What happened? You used to be so good with money." I was standing by the kitchen island, pouring a glass of water. I didn't offer her a seat. I didn't offer her a drink. I simply watched her, my pulse a steady, clinical 60 beats per minute. "I didn't lose my touch, Margaret," I said, my voice as flat as a sheet of glass. "I lost $10,214 to a forged signature and 3 missed mortgage cycles. It took us 2 years of aggressive litigation and credit repair to fix the hole you dug for us. We are in this apartment because we spent our original house deposit on your VIP Disney vacation and your surround sound system." She gasped, her hand flying to her throat in that rehearsed theatrical gesture of shock. "Are you still dwelling on that? It's been years, Sarah. Family is supposed to move on. I thought you were bigger than this." "I am an auditor, Margaret," I replied, walking toward the front door and swinging it wide open. "In my world, a debt doesn't disappear just because time passes. It either gets paid or it gets written off as a total loss. I've decided to write you off." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the hum of my refrigerator, the one I had bought with my own verified signature. "You're cold," she hissed, her face contorting into the same ugly expression I had seen in her kitchen 3 years ago. Truly cold. "No," I said, my hand firm on the door handle. "I'm just balanced. And right now, you're an unnecessary expense. Goodbye, Margaret." The sound of Margaret's heels clicking down the hallway finally faded into a dull silence. I didn't watch her through the peephole. I didn't wait for her to turn around and offer a half-hearted apology. I simply stood by the door, my hand resting on the cool metal of the deadbolt. Behind me, the apartment was quiet. David was in the study, his silhouette visible through the frosted glass door. He had heard everything. 3 years ago, he would have run after her. He would have begged me to be the bigger person for the sake of his mother's pride. But time, and a $10,000 debt, has a way of sharpening a person's vision. It took us 2 years of difficult conversations and 18 months of strictly separate bank accounts for him to realize that family is not a license to commit fraud. I turned the lock. The mechanical clack was the most satisfying sound I had heard all year. It was the sound of a closed file. I walked back to my desk and opened my laptop. My reflection in the dark screen looked older, perhaps a bit sharper around the eyes, but entirely unbothered. I am no longer the girl who was blindsided by a forged signature. I am the woman who keeps the receipts. Margaret thinks I am cold. She thinks I am a vulture because I refuse to let her theft go unpunished. But the truth is much simpler. I am an auditor. And in my world, there is no such thing as a small lie. A discrepancy of 1 cent is still a discrepancy. A betrayal of $1 is still a betrayal. $10,214.32. That was the price Margaret Miller placed on her relationship with her eldest son and his wife. She traded our trust, our house, and her place at our holiday table for a surround sound system and a trip to a theme park. To her, it was a clever game. To me, it was a terminal error in judgment. I looked at the framed photo on my desk, a picture of David and me on the balcony of this apartment. We aren't in a mansion. We aren't in the grand home Margaret wanted to lord over, but we are in a space that is entirely ours. There are no forged names on our lease, no hidden cards in our drawers. I took a final sip of my water, and felt the coldness settle in my chest. It wasn't the coldness of anger. It was the clarity of a balanced ledger. Some people spend their whole lives trying to fix broken people, pouring their energy into bottomless pits of entitlement. I chose to stop. I chose to audit my inner circle and remove the liabilities. I reached for my mouse and closed the folder titled Margaret's Debt, Final Audit. The screen flickered for a second before returning to my desktop wallpaper, a calm, gray horizon. The debt was never paid in cash, but in the end I got exactly what I was owed, my peace of mind. And that is a number that can never be manipulated.